Welcome to another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. On tonight's episode, we're focusing on the 70th annual CMHA Mental Health Week, which runs from May 3rd to May 9th. And in recognition of Mental Health Week, we're welcoming an amazing young man to the show tonight. My guest is a trauma-informed coach and psychotherapist, Frank Kewen. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the young man. Lie to me. Say it again.
My pleasure. So I should preface the audience with what we're doing here today in recognition of Mental Health Week. We thought it would be a great idea to take away some of the stigmas around seeking mental health help and showing that mental health is just as important as any other aspect of our health. So tonight's episode is going to look very much like what a therapy or coaching session would look like with Frank and one of his actual clients. I'm prefacing this with I am not an actual client, but in some of the chats that Frank and I have had prior to taping today's show, it's a possibility that I could very well become a client at some point. So I thank you for some of the insights that you've given me in preparation for tonight's show, Frank. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the stage over to Frank, and Frank, let you sort of lead the way in what these discussions would look like in real life for folks.
Sure, great. Thanks very much, Randy. And I want to just build on what you said about beginning to take down the stigma around seeking help for mental health, and to say to everyone who's watching or listening that coming to your own assistance is always the right thing to do. And there will be voices from our culture, from our family of origin, sometimes from our religious backgrounds, that tell us that there's something wrong with us if we need help, and to not reach out and to not ask. And so we really want to challenge that notion today and recognize that coming to our own assistance is always the right thing to do. And it takes courage and it takes bravery. So for those of you who are listening and who are wanting to take action to come to your own assistance and improve your mental health, I acknowledge your courage and your bravery. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, very important point. Thank you for mentioning that, Frank.
Great. So Randy and I met a couple of times and explored a number of different themes and things. And so one of the things that we landed on, of the infinite possibilities of things that we could talk about, is to begin to have a conversation around HomoShame and internalized HomoShame. And I'd like to begin by distinguishing homophobia and HomoShame. Homophobia is the fear of homosexuals, or the fear of being homosexual or queer, LGBTQ+. And there are times and places in our world, unfortunately today, where recognizing that fear is a really important barometer for assessing whether it's safe to be transparent about who we are and how we love. And there are times when that, and I'm going to say it this way, that the fear of being, that sense of fear of being, is an experience that is supported by shame. Shame goes to who we are, our very being, our essence, our life energy, and all the ways that it expresses itself. And so when we have internalized this shame around our being, that's internalized HomoShame. And we pick it up from the very subtle things, as subtle as the absence of characters in the stories that we were read as children who love differently than what is considered to be the norm or the majority. We pick it up through very direct messages, often well-intended and well-meaning, but very direct messages from our families of origin, from our culture, from the coaches of the sports teams, from the teachers, from the ministers, who heterosexualize everything and demonize anything that does not fit a heterosexual norm. And when we're very young people growing up, we don't have the mental capacity or the emotional capacity to understand that that's really about them. And so that can imprint us with this cloak or mark of shame. Brene Brown says that silence plus secrecy plus judgment equals shame. And the impacts of shame are that it sucks our life energy. It causes us to hide the organic blessing of our being. And that can have we can create structures that we respond to that by overachieving, by being super good, super competent, super kind, super nice, super rescuing, super pleasing, all kinds of things that we get lots of cookies for, but those cookies never satisfy the hunger. They never satisfy the hunger to simply be worthy as we are. The self-sabotaging of shame can take other forms that are not so pretty. We can't identify all of them today, but we can certainly begin to look at the ways that shame can keep us locked in relationships that are not authentic and not fulfilling, that are not truthful, that may be abusive, because we don't have a sense of our own worth and our own value. That kind of shame can lead to and support self-medication through addiction, either processes like gambling or work or sex or pornography or love relationships, or very specific substances, alcohol, recreational drugs, any number of things, food. We can eat our shame in our attempts to find some sense of satisfaction. And shame robs us of the original satisfaction of knowing that our being is enough. We are worthy. So what we're going to do a little bit of today is to explore some of that and to take some time to demonstrate a process for beginning to release some of that shame in order to let those structures that don't serve us dissolve. So I've said a lot. I wanted to give you a sense, those who are listening, of an overview of what it is that Randy and I have been exploring together and what we're going to continue to explore. So I like to be kind of practical as well. So Randy, I really want to appreciate and acknowledge your willingness to be a subject in this coaching. Thank you for that.
No, I think it's important. I really do. I think, as you and I have talked previously, I have some hesitancy around psychology in general, and I have a history of, being in therapy and speaking with counselors, both psychologists and psychiatrists, and I've always felt that I've been able to sort of manipulate those conversations so that I come out looking great. And it's again, the issue with me was that I thought if this psychiatrist or psychologist was any good, they'd realize that I'm lying to them. Right. But I realized that, it's a two-way communication, right? And if I'm not willing to be open and honest in that communication with regardless of who I'm speaking to, then how can I expect to get a truly accurate result that is going to help me? So
yes. And that's, I really appreciate you identifying that. And so often when I'm working with LGBTQ plus clients, we bump into this kind of background noise, this water that we've swum in for so many years of becoming extremely adept at hiding.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And so it is a sadness that anyone, and particularly LGBTQ plus people, have to wonder if the therapist that they're going to see or the psychiatrist or the doctor, social worker is an ally or is part of the pathologizing of sexual orientation.
Right.
So it makes sense that people don't walk in the door and say, yeah, so here's who I am and here's the issue and let's go.
Sure. And I mean, during the times that I thought that sort of helped, I wasn't even close to even being ready to come out as my authentic self. So I already had that those barriers up in front of me, and there was no way that I was going to come out to a counselor or a psychologist at that point in my life. So
yes, and one of the things that I often say to clients, and I'll say to you today, is that we never blame the child for how they learn to survive. We simply say, good for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're here, you made it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it struck me in some of the information that you sent before the taping, Frank, talking about, reflecting on your past life. And I think my earliest memory is probably goes back to my childhood as I have three brothers. There's only boys in my household. So my mom was the only female in our home. My dad was the president of the Minor Hockey Association in the small town I grew up in. And I was the only one of his sons who did not play hockey. So even before I knew what it meant to be gay or queer, I was already being labeled as the faggot in town because I wasn't the one playing hockey. And all my brothers played very well. And like I say, my dad coached and was president. So there was sort of that expectation that I should be following that same path. And because I didn't, what's wrong with that guy? So.
Yes. And that sense, that very early sense of what's wrong with me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And as we touched into in the introduction, when we're little people, we don't have the cognitive capacity or the emotional capacity to even know that, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe there's something wrong with this system. Maybe,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so part of our recovery from that kind of shame is to, as an adult, be able to revisit the experiences of our young child and be the corrective parent. In a sense, people say, well, we can't change our past, and that's true. It's absolutely true. We cannot have the supportive parent in our past that we didn't have, but we can become the supportive parent to ourselves now.
Right.
One of my mentors.
I was just going to say, and I don't feel that I didn't have supportive parenting growing up. I don't think my parents even recognized it. And some of the things that they would inadvertently say that I didn't even recognize until later in life, that, that probably is still sitting in the back of my head somewhere. Those sly comments and the idea that Randy's the only one of their sons that can't skate very well and all those things. Right. But again, I don't put that on them. That's just sort of the way society was. There was almost zero representation of what it looked like to be queer in the public at that point in time. I think the earliest memory that I have of anyone who represented being queer on TV was Billy Crystal in Soap. And that was a very exaggerated, stereotypical portrayal. So, I mean, funny as heck, no question about it, and enjoyed the show. But yeah, that wasn't, I didn't see myself or see what I thought I would end up growing up to be in social media, or in media rather. There was no social media back in those days. But yeah, there was no example of what that looked like. And any example that I did see of queer folks was always that exaggerated, which is fine, because I love my flamboyant friends, but at the same time, that's not, again, a reflection of me.
No.
So, and it was those were the out queer folks that got bashed,
Yes. Yeah. So we're touching into, I think, three primary things: the absence of witnesses to the blessing that we are, the stereotyping and making it one dimension, and then the outright rejection, demonization, or violence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we take a look at these things in terms of our culture, our religion, our family of origin, we're not looking for their intent. We're listening for the impact that has on the developing child.
Sure.
Yeah. Great. Any questions or comments that you have at this point, Randy?
No, I mean, just that, like I say, it struck me that I still have, it's funny, when I look back on sort of my pre-coming out days,
yes.
It's very foggy. When I think back to high school, for example, and when I think back on high school, I have fond memories of high school. I still have many good friends from my high school days and elementary school days, again, because I grew up in a small town, so you got to know a lot of people. But there's still this fog in my memories around who I was, in quotation marks, because again, I really didn't know, and there was a lot of confusion around why I'm not quote unquote normal. You know, why am I not more like my brothers? Why am I not athletic? Why am I not able to express myself the way my brothers do? And yeah, certainly feeling shame about some of the thoughts that started to creep into my head as I got older and hit puberty and realized that even at a young age that I had an attraction to other guys, and totally being confused about why that was happening. My oldest brother is 10 years older than I am. So, as I was coming into puberty, he was already in adulthood, and, I was seeing him with girlfriends and playing hockey and, this buff, strong guy. And I'm this little fat kid because, like you mentioned earlier, I ate my shame. That's how I sort of, took some solace and protected myself was food. And to some extent, I still do. Body image is still a major issue for me, and something that I struggle with all the time, and have sort of yo-yoed back and forth between, working out like crazy and getting fit, and then going back to, letting that fall to the wayside. I'm fortunately back in a getting fit phase, and I'm hoping that it's going to stick this time. But
yes.
But yeah, that it all tends, when I think about, the origins of that, it really does go back to my childhood, and that idea of, not being the athletic son, brother. That's I'm not saying that was an expectation of my parents or my brothers. I was never pressured into getting into hockey or anything. It was always my decision. And sometimes I felt like I'd wished that I had been pressured into doing it, because maybe I would have been good at it. I don't know. But yeah, just that whole idea of being different and not really being able to understand why.
Yes. And along with that sense of being different is the silence and the secrecy and the judgment around it.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time alone as a kid. And that was because that was what I wanted, was to be alone. And I still value my alone time, but I now see that as sort of as a child anyway, a way to protect myself, because if I was alone, then there was no one around that I had to worry about saying anything derogatory to me or making comments that, as kids do.
And so many LGBTQ folk develop what I'm going to refer to as the inner police person, who controls their impulses and their desires and their preferences and their expressions, not just of sexuality in its overt way, but of their sensuality, of their orientation to life, what it is that they prefer and love, and learn to police that in order to find some place to belong in this environment.
Sure.
And that police person can stay with us as an adult and become our worst inner critic, who is constantly criticizing, judging, shaming us, and in a sense, telling us to stop living so out loud.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, I've been accused of that on more than one occasion, that, you know, I need to forgive myself, is what I often hear from those close to me, that, you know, you need to learn to forgive yourself and sort of move on and not dwell on past mistakes. As I think I mentioned to you when we spoke before the show as well, you know, I'm a big believer that that regrets are real. You know, anyone that says to me, you know, regrets are a waste of time, I don't believe that. I definitely have regrets in my life for things that I've done or not done. And there are some things that, yes, I wish I could change, but at the same time, I worry that if I had some magical power to be able to go back and change things, would I be where I am today, which is in a place that I never dreamed I'd be able to be, and never happier than I've been, never more content with who I am, never more proud to speak about who I truly am and live my authentic self and share that as openly and as publicly as I do. So if I went back to my younger self and made a tweak in that story that could possibly make me feel better back then, but could change everything the way it is now, despite all the noise and the hardships that I've been through. You know, if that were the case, if that would change everything, then I would gladly live through all the trauma again, because where I am today, like I say, I can't even describe the life that I have today is one that I never dreamed I would have.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful place to have arrived to.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very freeing.
Yes.
It's absolutely freeing. And a lot of that is because, you know, I got to a point in my life where it was, okay, it's just time to be me and not worry so much about what others think of me. Although I do, you know, I'm one of those people who I don't care what you think of me, but at the same time, I care what you think about me.
Yes.
And, you know, I credit a lot of that to my husband, who, you know, meeting Aaron literally saved my life in every possible way another human being can save someone's life, and allowed me to have that support and that freedom to be me and not have to worry about anything. So that's,
yes.
Yeah, it's and I recognize the privilege that I sit in being able to say that. My Kleenex is too far away to reach, so I don't want to get into it too much. But
yes.
But yeah, I couldn't be happier with the life that I've been able to build and we've been able to build together. So no regrets.
It's good news.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So I sent you some questions to consider. And I know that Deanna, I think, is going to screen share those.
Yes.
At some point. And
yeah.
I'm just going to read them for those who are listening. So if you're watching and listening, consider the ways your sexual orientation was shamed in your history, and possibly even today, either directly or more subtly through inference or neglect. Consider institutions, school authorities, teachers, priests, ministers, government leaders. What were the messages about being queer? Consider your culture, sports figures, film, television, literature that you read in school that was assigned to you or that was read to you as a child. Were there any positive, healthy witnesses to the possibility of a queer orientation being a blessing? Or is there an absence and a neglect or a direct shaming or a violence towards? Consider your family of origin. And again, we're listening here not for intent, but for impact. Was there a homophobia within your family, a shaming of queer culture and queer people, or a simply dismissing of it as being something to laugh at rather than an actual viable choice? Was there anyone, when you had that first, if you were a queer identified boy, was there anyone that had your back and was championing you and celebrating and ritualizing with you that first impulse to take another boy's hand? Was there anyone to ask, how do I ask a boy out? Dad, what was it like when you were a kid and asked your first boy out?
That would have been quite a conversation.
That would have been quite a conversation. Dad, what was it like for you the first time you kissed a boy? And, you know, these are conversations that some heterosexually identified boys never have with their father either, but some do, or some know that they can. Or there's a teacher at school or a coach that you can confide in and say, I just got dumped for my first time. That's why my game is so off. What was it like for you? Was there an absence? Was there a shaming? Was there a judgment? Was there a secrecy? Your social environment, considering the friends that you grew up with, what was the conversation around queer folk and homosexuality? Was there a curiosity, an openness, a willingness to celebrate? And again, we're listening here not for the intent, but for the impact of the absence of healthy socialization and support for queer identified people. And the impact.
All great questions, Frank. I knew this was going to happen with this episode, that we would get to a point where we have to wrap things up. But I would love to invite you back to continue this conversation if you're willing to come back, and we can start actually delving into some of the answers to those questions.
Absolutely. Yes, I would love to.
Excellent.
It's just great. I think it's so important for us to be a part of creating safe spaces and sanctuaries where we can explore these impacts and begin to learn some tools to help ourselves reparent ourselves, re-socialize ourselves, reculture ourselves.
100%. Yeah. Well, Frank, I absolutely appreciate the time that you spent with us. I appreciate all of your insights. I absolutely appreciate you and the way you've been able to help me in such a short period of time. So thank you for that. Thank you for watching another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. Remember, Mental Health Week, so it's time to hashtag get real about how you feel. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you next time.